Most people listening to this still believe freedom is permanent. They believe it is a fixed right, something earned once and kept forever. The freedom to travel, the freedom to spend, the freedom to move money, build a business, speak, transact, and live without asking permission. But here is the truth almost nobody wants to confront. Freedom is no longer something you automatically have. It is quietly becoming something you are granted. And once that transition is complete, there is no dramatic collapse, no announcement, no single moment you can point to and say this is when it happened. It will already be too late. My name is Marcus Blackwell. I am not a financial advisor. I am a historian of financial systems, debt cycles, currency collapses, and power structures. If you want to stay ahead of what is coming, stay with me. Throughout most of modern history, freedom was based on capability. Could you afford something? Do you have the skills? Did you have the resources? If the answer was yes, you were free to act. That was the invisible agreement between the individual and the system. If you worked, saved, and followed the rules, doors stayed open. You could travel if you had a passport and enough money. You could open a business if you had capital and paperwork. You could move funds if a bank approved your account. Freedom was not unlimited, but it was practical, predictable, and largely automatic. This became the social contract of the 20th century, especially in the United States. Capability meant choice. Choice meant freedom. But history reveals a pattern almost no one is taught in school. Every mature system eventually reaches a point where capability is no longer enough. When systems grow too large, too centralized, and too interconnected, control replaces trust. And that is when freedom quietly shifts from capability to permission. This is the turning point most people miss. Permission-based systems do not ask whether you can do something. They ask whether you should be allowed to. They introduce conditions, approvals, risk scores, and compliance checks. Not all at once. Slowly. Logically. Under the language of safety, efficiency, and modernization. And the moment freedom depends on permission rather than ability, it stops being a right and becomes a privilege that can be paused, limited, or revoked. This is not a theory. This is how every advanced system in history tightens before it breaks. And once that shift is complete, freedom does not disappear dramatically. It simply becomes conditional. The Roman Empire did not collapse overnight. It introduced internal travel permits long before it fell. The Soviet Union did not imprison everyone instantly. It implemented internal passports that determined where you were allowed to live, work, and travel. Weimar Germany did not confiscate savings all at once. It froze withdrawals, controlled prices, and restricted movement step by step. Bretton Woods did not end with chaos. It ended quietly with capital controls, gold restrictions, and currency pegs snapping one by one. Every time, freedom did not vanish violently. It was bureaucratized. That same transition is happening again, but this time it is digital. Border control is no longer a stamp and a glance. It is facial recognition, biometric databases, and automated decision-making systems powered by artificial intelligence that assess identity and risk before a physical document is even checked. In many modern airports today, you no longer present a passport in the traditional sense. Instead, your face becomes your identity, and your fingerprint becomes your authorization, linking you instantly to global databases that hold everything from travel history to security assessments. This biometric profile is now being connected to tax records, banking systems, social media presence, and online behavior. Not in theory, not in the hypothetical future, in reality, right now. What makes this shift even more concrete is a major policy move emerging from the United States. Under a proposal by the Trump administration, visitors from the roughly 42 countries in the U.S. visa waiver program would soon be required to submit up to 5 years of their social media history before they can enter the country. This applies to travelers who currently do not need a visa for short trips to the United States under the Electronic System for Travel Authorization, or ESTA, and represents an expansion of immigration screening to include deep personal digital footprints. Applicants would need to list the social media accounts they have used over the past 5 years, along with email addresses used over the past 10 years, and even detailed information about close family members, all as part of border vetting. This is not a distant proposal. It was published in the Federal Register by U.S. Customs and Border Protection and is currently open for public comment before becoming final. Critics warn that such requirements could chill travel and bind personal digital lives directly into national security assessments. What was once optional disclosure at times of a traditional visa interview is now on track to become mandatory for anyone hoping to step onto American soil without lengthy permission processes. The merging of digital identity, social behavior, and physical movement is a real and accelerating trend, and we are seeing it unfold step by step in policies that affect millions of people every year. This is the critical shift most people are missing right now because it is happening in real time, hidden inside policies that sound reasonable and upgrades that feel convenient. Identity, money, and movement are no longer separate systems. They are actively being merged. Once that merger is complete, freedom stops being something you automatically possess and becomes something you are conditionally granted. The question quietly changes across society. It is no longer possible you do this. It becomes whether you are allowed to do this. That shift may sound minor, but in every historical case, it marks the line between personal autonomy and centralized control. We are already seeing this play out through current events. Travel is increasingly tied to digital authorization systems. Financial activity is monitored in real time under expanded compliance rules. Accounts are frozen first and explained later. Payment processors now decide who can transact, what causes are acceptable, and which behaviors trigger restrictions. None of this requires a court order in many cases. It happens through policy enforcement embedded directly into financial infrastructure, and once systems are digital, restrictions can be applied instantly, remotely, and at scale. The early 2020s were not an exception. They were a rehearsal. Borders closed overnight. People with valid passports and money were denied the right to leave. Bank withdrawals were limited in multiple countries. Small businesses were shut down by decree. Entire populations were told movement was not permitted, not because of individual wrongdoing, but because system-level rules changed. These measures were justified as temporary. History shows that temporary controls almost never disappear. They evolve, refine, and embed themselves into permanent systems. Now layer current digital currency development onto this reality. The digital euro is already in pilot phases. The digital dollar is openly discussed by U.S. institutions. Japan is testing a digital yen. These are not just modern payment tools. They are programmable monetary systems, money that can be restricted by location, spending category, time frame, or policy objective, funds that can expire, transactions that can be approved or denied automatically. Central banks and regulators have publicly acknowledged these features as tools for efficiency, compliance, and control. When digital currency is linked to digital identity, and digital identity is verified through biometrics, the system gains total visibility over economic life. And once total visibility exists, history tells us exactly what follows. Control does not arrive with an announcement. It arrives quietly, through rules, updates, and compliance checks that most people do not question until they are personally affected. Here is where this becomes genuinely dangerous in the context of what is happening right now. Systems like this work perfectly as long as you remain compliant and unremarkable. They are fast, seamless, and incredibly convenient. You move through airports using facial recognition. You pay with a fingerprint or a phone tap. You open bank accounts and financial apps in minutes without ever speaking to a human being. Friction is removed, and life feels easier than it ever has. That convenience is exactly why these systems are being widely accepted. The risk only appears when something triggers the system. Not an arrest, not a criminal charge, just a flag, an automated review, a compliance issue. Suddenly funds are delayed, transactions are declined without explanation, accounts are frozen pending verification. Travel authorizations are paused. You are not told you broke a law. You are simply told access is restricted. Not because you cannot do something, but because the system has decided you are not allowed to do it at that moment. This is how modern control actually operates. There are no soldiers in the streets, no emergency announcements, no visible crackdown. Control is exercised through dashboards, algorithms, and policy rules embedded deep inside financial and identity infrastructure. Permissions are adjusted quietly, remotely, and instantly. And because it is done digitally, there is no clear authority to appeal to and no immediate timeline for resolution. Most people still believe freedom disappears through chaos, coups, or authoritarian takeovers. That is no longer how it happens. In the modern world, freedom erodes through optimization, through safety frameworks, through efficiency upgrades, through systems designed to reduce friction for the majority, until one day the friction is applied directly to you. Now here is the part nobody talks about. The smartest, wealthy individuals see this clearly, and they are not fighting the system. They are not protesting in the streets. They are not hiding money illegally. They are not trying to outsmart governments with secrecy. That era is over. Surveillance systems powered by artificial intelligence do not miss patterns. Those who try to disappear become targets. History proves this every time. Instead, the truly prepared are taking a very different approach, one that aligns closely with what we are already seeing among high-net-worth individuals, global entrepreneurs, and multinational families today. They are not trying to escape laws or hide from governments. They are reducing dependency on any single jurisdiction, currency, or control system. This is what I call permission redundancy, the ability to function, move, and transact even if one system restricts access. In practical terms, this means obtaining second residencies and, when possible, second citizenships through legal programs that already exist. It means establishing banking relationships in more than one country, under different regulatory regimes. It means holding assets across multiple legal frameworks instead of concentrating everything inside one national system. Real estate abroad, international businesses, diversified custodial relationships, all compliant, all documented. The reason for this strategy is simple and grounded in current events. When systems tighten, they do not give advance notice. Policies change quickly. Access can be restricted instantly. Applications that were once routine suddenly become impossible. Borders close. Accounts freeze. And those without alternatives discover too late that optionality is not something you can build during a crisis. The people who are prepared are not planning to flee tomorrow. They are planning to never be trapped by a single system when conditions change. Look at where the capital is quietly moving. Outside the core Western financial centers, into countries that are not fully integrated into identity-based control systems. Serbia, Turkey, Paraguay, El Salvador, Argentina, Panama, Thailand, Cambodia, Mauritius, Caribbean nations. These are not perfect places. Infrastructure varies. Quality of life varies. That is not the point. The point is optionality. You do not need to relocate permanently, uproot your family, or abandon the life you have built. That is not what preparation looks like in the modern world. What you need are legal doors that remain open, a plan B that exists quietly in the background long before you are forced to rely on it. Preparation is not about panic moves. It is about optionality. It is about having alternatives when others have none. History is very clear on this point. Once restrictions arrive, systems do not pause to let people adjust. Applications that were once routine suddenly stop being accepted. Residency programs close. Citizenship pathways are suspended. Borders harden overnight. Banking relationships are frozen without warning. And at that stage, preparation becomes impossible because the window has already closed. This is why the timing matters more than the action itself. A second residency obtained early gives you freedom of movement later. An international bank account opened legally while regulations are flexible gives you financial continuity during disruption. A plan B built calmly today prevents desperation tomorrow. The goal is not to leave. The goal is to never be trapped when conditions change. This applies to wealth as well. Wealth protection is no longer about secrecy. It is about placement, distribution, jurisdictional balance, real estate in multiple countries, companies structured across regions, bank accounts and systems that are not synchronized into a single control grid. Everything legal, everything documented, everything intentional. Cryptocurrency deserves a clear and honest discussion here. It is not a magic escape. It is traceable, regulated, increasingly monitored. Privacy tools often increase scrutiny rather than reduce it. Long-term survival does not come from hiding. It comes from alignment, choosing jurisdictions with reasonable regulations instead of fighting systems that will always overpower individuals. If you live in a country that enforces global taxation, such as the United States, the strategy becomes significantly more complex, and current events are already reinforcing this reality. American citizens are taxed on worldwide income, regardless of where they live, where their assets are held, or where their businesses operate. Financial reporting requirements continue to expand, compliance thresholds are tightening, and information sharing between governments is increasing every year. This means long-term planning is no longer optional. It is essential. And in some cases, it requires difficult, deeply personal decisions about residency, asset structure, and long-term jurisdictional exposure. What does not work is assuming the system will reverse course. History has never rewarded that mindset. Mature systems do not voluntarily loosen control once it has been centralized. They refine it. They digitize it. They automate it. Pretending regulation will soften or surveillance will retreat is not a strategy. It is denial. Here is the brutal truth most people do not want to hear. Freedom in the future will not belong to the loudest voices or the angriest reactions. It will belong to those who prepared early, quietly, and legally, while conditions were still flexible. When systems shift from capability to permission, the prepared do not panic. They move calmly, using options already in place, while everyone else stands in lines that no longer move, waiting for approvals that never come. This is not fear-mongering. It is pattern recognition, the same kind historians use to identify turning points long before the headlines change. Digital identity systems, central bank digital currencies, automated border control, real-time financial surveillance. These are not random developments happening in isolation. They are interconnected components of a single architecture that is being built quietly, deliberately, and incrementally. Each piece on its own looks reasonable. Together, they fundamentally change how freedom functions in daily life. Here's the part most people overlook. The question is no longer whether this system will exist in the future. It already exists. It is being tested, expanded, and normalized right now. The real question is whether you will still have options once participation becomes unavoidable. Because history shows that once systems reach full deployment, flexibility disappears. Opt-outs vanish, and last-minute preparation becomes impossible. So pause for a moment and ask yourself honestly, if movement were restricted tomorrow, would you have legal residency or citizenship somewhere else? If capital controls were imposed, would you have assets or banking access outside your primary system? If digital currency rules changed overnight, would you still be able to transact, pay bills, or support your family without interruption? Most people have never considered these questions, and that is exactly the risk. If the answer to any of them is no, the time to act is not later. When you understand the past, the future stops being frightening. It becomes predictable. And remember this, the wise prepare quietly, while the unprepared panic publicly. Tell me in the comments where you are seeing these changes already happening and what step you are taking to protect your future. And share this with someone who still believes freedom is automatic.